Thank you so much, guys, for coming today. We're already doing lecture 15, which is the endocrine system 2, and then we'll go and do the review on Thursday and then midterm 3. So I think last time we talked about just the general format and the two types of hormones: this protein soluble, water soluble, which are protein, and then the lipid soluble. So that's what we're going to concentrate on today. Lipid soluble, we'll talk about the mechanism of action of lipid soluble hormones, and then we'll talk about other hormones from thyroid and so forth that are also lipid soluble and their functions. Some of which you've already come across, like PTH and calcitonin, and you kind of had problems with those in the module too, when it was asking you about what their effects are. So we'll kind of try to go through that as well. Right. So today we're going to talk about intracellular receptors, right? That means these lipid soluble hormones cannot, do not exist properly in an aqueous environment. So they are attached in protein during transport in blood to a protein, and then they will detach from the protein, and then they will just enter the membrane, the cell membrane, because the cell membrane is lipid. Okay, so they also like lipids, so they'll go through. And we talked last time about the two kinds of receptors for these, the intramembrane, intracellular receptors. There are two types. Does anybody remember which and which? Huh? Yes, cytoplasmic. So that means this receptor will be in the cytoplasm, and the other one is nuclear. Yes. Okay, so it's called nuclear receptor. Okay, so today I think I'll show you a cartoon of one that attaches to a to a cytoplasmic receptor. Okay, so these are lipid soluble, and therefore, the hormone has always got to be attached to a protein in an aqueous environment. Okay, so can anybody try to suggest a reason why you have a cytoplasmic and a nuclear receptor? Why not just have one receptor maybe stationed in the nucleus, since that's where they all go to anyway? Why do you think there is a cytoplasmic one and a nucleus one? That's a kind of tough question, but when you think about it, because these are not soluble in water, okay, there are some lipids that have a polar group, right? Like the lipid bilayer, they've got a phosphate here that's kind of charged. So these have some part that's hydrophilic. Okay, so if you have a lipid soluble hormone that is totally non-polar, okay, it is just water-hating, hydrophobic, right? So that one might attach to a cytoplasmic receptor, right? Because the cytoplasm is, after all, what? Aqueous. It's all water. Okay, so it will not survive just short distance to go to the nucleus. So that's why you have a cytoplasmic receptor for those very hydrophobic steroid hormones or lipid soluble hormones. Okay, but some that have a little bit of charge on them, they can go straight into the nucleus and then attach to a nuclear receptor once they get there. Okay. So that's good. Anyway, these lipid soluble hormones have a longer lag phase. Why? Because you've got to do the transcription, that means form the messenger RNA. After that, it's got to come out of the nucleus, and then you do translation, which is the actual formation of that protein chain. By the time you have a protein chain, time has passed. But the thing about this is that they last even longer, because even after secretion stops of the steroid, as long as you have the protein there, you continue to feel the effects of the steroid, of that lipid soluble hormone. Okay, I'll keep sort of saying steroid because most of the lipid soluble hormones are steroids. Okay, but that's what I mean, lipid soluble. Okay, so that's why it will take a long time for the cell to actually respond. But once the protein is made, then it can last for some time. So that's why they are slow acting, right? Because of that process you have to make the RNA. So we'll go straight away into the mechanism of action of lipid soluble hormones. Okay. So in this case, this one is going straight to the nucleus, right? So of course, the first stage is that it will unbind from the protein that is carrying it in blood, because the blood is an aqueous environment. And then once it reaches the target cell, and then it enters the the cell, and then in this case, it's going to attach to a nuclear receptor, right? Because it's going straight into the nucleus. So this one is a nuclear receptor. So this may have some sort of hydrophilic parts on it. This kind of hormone will. Okay. Once it gets into the nucleus, okay, it will attach to a certain specific spot on the DNA. Okay. That is what is called a hormone response element. Okay. Because the DNA has got genes on it, a lot of genes on it, right? And then each gene, the start of each gene, there's a certain molecule called the hormone response element. So that when the hormone receptor complex comes in, it will go to that specific hormone response element so that it will produce or transcribe that specific protein. Okay? So it will attach to a hormone response element, okay? And then it will cause transcription of that gene only. Okay? And then after that, it's gonna this stage is attaching to the protein, to the nuclear receptor, and this stage here is actually attaching to the hormone response element. And then once that happens, you have transcription. Okay, you are transcribing the message of the DNA sequence onto the messenger RNA. So this is transcription. Okay. So in the exam, I want you to be able to say these things because you've already done mitosis, you've already done all these protein synthesis in biology 101. And so you use these terms that, okay, this is what's happening. mRNA synthesis is fine, but the process is transcription. You are transcribing the message onto RNA, right? Onto messenger RNA. All right? Okay? And then, through the nuclear pores, the messenger RNA will exit the nucleus and go into the cytoplasm. Okay? And then, in the cytoplasm, what is it going to do? It's going to attach to a free ribosome. Right? Once it attaches to a free ribosome, then what happens? You translate the message that has been transcribed onto the messenger RNA and you produce a protein. So that's translation occurs in the cytoplasm, right? Translation, which is the code that's on the messenger RNA is translated into a sequence of amino acids forming a protein, a specific protein, all right? Okay, and then that protein is produced. And then the effect of that protein will be the effects of the hormone. Okay? So sometimes in the exam I might say, okay, can you describe to me a lipid soluble hormone that attaches to a receptor in the cytoplasm? Then you talk about the attachment here, or if I'm asking about a specific lipid soluble hormone that will attach to a nuclear receptor, then you talk about that. But later on, I'll give you examples of actual hormones that will attach to a, to a nuclear receptor, and ones that will attach to a cytoplasmic receptor. And then you just tell me about that. Okay. So there's the whole process for translation and transcription and the information of the protein. Okay. So that's a 5-point question right in the exam. And then you get bonus. All right, good. So this is going to show you the same process.
Steroid hormones are not water soluble. They travel in the blood attached to protein carriers. When steroid hormones arrive at their target cells, they dissociate from their protein carriers and pass through the plasma membrane of the cell. Some steroid hormones bind to specific receptor proteins in the cytoplasm and then move as a hormone receptor complex into the nucleus. Other steroids travel directly into the nucleus before encountering their receptor proteins, not shown. The hormone receptor protein, activated by binding to the hormone, is now able to bind to specific regions of the DNA. These DNA regions are known as the hormone response elements. The binding of the hormone receptor complex has a direct effect on the level of transcription at that site. Messenger RNA, mRNA, is produced, which then codes for the synthesis of specific proteins.
Okay, and then the protein will have the effect of that steroid. All right, so now we move on to the pituitary. Okay, remember the pituitary, the one that sits on what part of the floor of the cranium? What part is that? The theta testicle, right? It sits right in there, and we saw it. You see right in there. Theta testicle. So the pituitary has got the anterior pituitary, which is on the front, and you know, that is controlled by hypothalamic hormones. Okay, and then the posterior pituitary towards the back, which is actually controlled by action potentials from the hypothalamus, and we'll talk about that. So that the posterior pituitary is called the neural hypophysis because it's controlled by you know, action potentials from the nervous system, and then the adenohypophysis is the anterior pituitary because it's controlled by hormones from the you know, hypothalamus. Okay, so it is about 9 you know, hormones that it secretes. Okay, to control body functions, different things, metabolism, and so forth. Okay, all due to maintain homeostasis. So it will control, the hypothalamus will control the pituitary in 2 ways. Okay, the anterior pituitary is controlled by hormones, and the posterior pituitary is controlled by action potentials. Okay, the posterior pituitary is controlled by action potentials. Alright, so the posterior pituitary is connected to the hypothalamus by a stalk-like structure called the infundibulum. Okay. So normally for all these glands that we're going to talk about, I'll kind of show you the picture of the whole body and show you exactly where it's located in relation to the whole body. So the pituitary is one of those that we said is found in the brain, right? From last time, and you can see the theta testicle here with on the sphenoid bone. So there is the pituitary. So it's got an anterior part and a posterior part. So we'll talk about that, and I think that was some of the challenges you had in your module about the anterior pituitary and how it's controlled by the hypothalamus, right? You know, you can always look at this later on, but you can see the hypothalamus is on top, and the hypothalamus is under the thalamus. Okay, so so the thalamus is kind of like here, this circular structure, and then the hypothalamus is kind of, you know, down here. Okay, and then this is the infundibulum. Thank you. And then there's the pituitary right there. Okay, I'd like you to look at these actual dissections in the actual human brain, human cadavers, and stuff like that. That's why I include these pictures, because in the lab we are only exposed to the cat. Okay, so I want you to see these actual pictures. All right. So the posterior pituitary. Okay. Actually, what happens is that you see, it's called the neural hypophysis. The you know, cell bodies of the axons that will generate the action potential to the pituitary are located in the hypothalamus, right? And then the axon will go here, and then the axon will branch right into those synaptic terminals. Okay? So what actually happens is that the cell bodies in the hypothalamus actually produce those hormones. Okay? Then they are packaged in very tiny little vesicles, and it will go along the axon. And then it will be packaged in bigger vesicles in the synaptic vesicles, just like any neuromuscular junction, okay? And then those hormones are packaged in here, in the synaptic terminals, okay? So that later on, when the hypothalamus releases an action potential, okay, then it will cause that hormone contained in the synaptic vesicles to be released from the pituitary. But the hormone was made where? up there in the hypothalamus. Okay? Alright, so it is called the neurohypophysis because of that. What's the other name for the pituitary? Hypophysis. Okay? The other name for the pituitary is hypophysis, okay? So that's one. So it's the part of the pituitary hypophysis that's controlled by the part of the brain, neuron, okay, by neurons, okay. So the infundibulum is the stalk. So you remember what we called axons in the nervous system, in the central nervous system? What did we call them? From when we did the nervous system, they're called tracts, right? Remember tracts? And then axons outside of the central nervous system, we call them nerves. Yeah. Okay, so this will be the tract, because soon I'll be talking about the tract, because it's important when it sends the action potential. I'll be talking about this in a little bit, okay? So I just wanted you to remember that. And then, of course, the anterior pituitary is controlled by hormones that are released in here by the, for instance, like growth hormone, releasing hormone, okay, it's produced in the hypothalamus, and then the anterior pituitary will release growth hormone. Okay, you see what I'm saying? Sometimes it will release growth hormone inhibiting hormone, and so somatostatin. Okay, so the blood vessels, remember, endocrine glands secrete within, and therefore the hormone will travel in blood. So the blood vessels connecting the hypothalamus. So these will be blood vessels. Blood vessels connecting the hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary will carry the hormones that were produced in the like gonadotropin releasing hormone, for instance, will cause the release of the gonadotropins, which are LH, luteinizing hormone, and FSH, which are involved in reproduction. Okay? Or it will release growth hormone releasing hormone, and then the pituitary, the anterior pituitary will release the growth hormone itself. Okay? So blood vessels will carry that. So it's going to be called a portal system. A portal is like a carrier of blood vessels, and we will talk about that in a little bit. And here is the tract for the neurohypophysis. Okay, so we'll talk about those two things: the portal system of blood vessels and the tracts on the posterior part. Okay. So and it's called the adenohypophysis because it's controlled by hormones that are released by the hypothalamus. Okay. Usually in the exam I ask about how the hypothalamus controls the posterior and the anterior pituitary. I usually do that. Okay, so you can see how the posterior pituitary is attached by this infundibulum, whereas the anterior pituitary is not. So the blood vessels connecting the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary will carry the hormones through. Okay? Okay, so here comes the words I was talking about. I was talking earlier on. So the hypophyseal portal system will be the blood vessels controlling the anterior pituitary, right? Okay? So don't let the big word fool you, because in the morning you're like, what? You know? So hypothalamus, what's that? Hypothalamus, right? So that part of the word means hypothalamus. Okay? Hypophyseal, hypophysis, pituitary. Okay? So it's the blood vessels, okay, that come from the hypothalamus going to the pituitary. That's what that word is. Remember the other word for pituitary is hypophysis, hypophyseal. Because it's better to say hypophyseal than pituitary. Doesn't make sense. So it's better to use that. So that's why they put it together like that. Okay. So it's blood vessels carries the hormones all the way to the anterior pituitary. It's not all the way anyway. It's just a short distance like this. And then the pituitary will release the hormone, like gonadotropin releasing hormone, because it's the anterior pituitary will release luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, FSH. Or growth hormone releasing hormone from the hypothalamus will cause the anterior pituitary to produce growth hormone. Okay? So that's that. So that's the the hypothalamus-hypophyseal, portal system. Then remember the tracks of those neurons I was talking about that start off in the hypothalamus. Okay, so that's the hypothalamus-hypophyseal tract. Okay, so that will control the posterior pituitary, right? So these hormones are produced by these neurons whose cell bodies are actually located in the hypothalamus. And then they're packaged in tiny little vesicles. Then they will travel down the axon, and then they'll be packaged in bigger vesicles at the synaptic termina as synaptic vesicles, okay? Carrying that hormone, whatever that hormone is, okay? And then that hormone will be released from the pituitary, but it was made in the hypothalamus, and it just traveled down the axon and ends up in the pituitary. So the hypothalamus, via that same neuron, will send an action potential, and then it will cause exocytosis of those vesicles containing the hormone, and that's it. And then it's released from the pituitary. Okay, so definitely know how the hypothalamus controls the posterior pituitary and the anterior pituitary. Okay, so that always counts. All right. So this one is talking about hormones of the hypothalamus, right? And the hormones of the hypothalamus control the anterior pituitary. So that's why you can see anterior, okay? Because it's those hormones that will control that. So like I was saying, growth hormone, releasing hormone will cause the release of growth hormone from the pituitary, okay? And it does what it does, growth, increasing cell size. And then there's also somatostatin, so which is called growth hormone, inhibiting hormone, which is called somatostatin. So those guys who end up getting very tall, they must have had not that signal from somatostatin. You know what I'm saying? So to stop growing, okay, and then they get very tall. Shaq and them were blessed to have a whole bunch of this, and so they kept on going tall. But some of the world's tallest men, if you ever seen the encyclopedia, whenever they're standing upright, they're always on crutches because they cannot, control the whole. It's too tall. It's now a pathological condition rather than just because you're tall. You know what I'm saying? It's now no longer good for the body. Just like the dwarfism is too short, and some of that is because regulation of these hormones goes awry, right? Okay, so it decreases growth hormone so that you have definite growth. Okay, and then thyrotropin releasing hormone, it's small peptide again. It increases thyroid, hormone secretion. Okay, from the thyroid gland, which we'll be talking about very soon. And then gonadotropin releasing hormone. Gonadotropins are to do with reproduction. LH is a gonadotropin, luteinizing hormone, and FSH. So it causes the secretion of those, all right, and so on and so on. But anyway, just know that there are all these hormones that are produced by the hypothalamus that control the anterior pituitary. Okay, the posterior pituitary produces a few hormones, and antidiuretic hormone, which acts on the kidneys to retain more water. Okay, so that you lose less water in the urine, so you can increase, like when your blood pressure goes down, or when you're thirsty and you don't drink water, you might release antidiuretic hormone so that you retain more fluids and your blood volume goes up, your blood pressure goes up. Okay? So the kidney is not only involved in cleaning up, metabolic waste from blood, it's also involved with maintaining blood pressure. Okay? Because it has the ability to lose fluids or gain or retain more fluids. And that affects blood volume. The amount of blood in the pipes literally is the amount of pressure that you're going to generate. Simple, right? So antidiuretic hormone released by the posterior pituitary, and then oxytocin, which is for pregnancy, causes contraction of the uterus and so forth. But it's also in men, but they don't know the function of it. They quite know what the function of it is, but it might cause things like the vas deferens and so forth to contract when you are releasing, sperm cells from the male reproductive system. It could be that, because after all, it causes smooth muscle contraction. Okay, so anyway, and then a whole bunch of these hormones we talked about from the anterior pituitary. Okay, so just know that that forms about 9 hormones that are released by the pituitary. So move on to the thyroid. The thyroid is over here. It's in the neck, and it's got like these lateral lobes. You see these lateral lobes, and then it's got this sort of pyramidal lobe. Okay, so that's, and then these lateral lobes are kind of joined by what's called the isthmus. Okay, this is an actual cadaver, so that's why I made these pictures. All right, and then in the diagram form there is, and it kind of wraps around the trachea, and it doesn't touch at the back. It's like a C-shaped kind of ring that goes like that. And then behind it there will be the parathyroid, which we'll talk about next. Okay, so good. So it's the largest endocrine gland, right? It's totally committed to producing hormones as an endocrine gland. Some of the other glands, like the pancreas, it's got an exocrine function. We'll talk about it later on. So it's got both endocrine and exocrine function. So it's not totally all endocrine gland. So that's why this becomes the largest endocrine. Okay. So it's located on the anterior of the neck, and it's got those lateral lobes, pyramidal, and the isthmus that kind of joins the two lateral lobes, and it goes to the back, but it doesn't touch. It doesn't completely surround the trachea, and we'll talk about the significance of that in a little while. Okay, when I show you the pictures of that, but yeah, it doesn't touch at the back, and so it's got follicles in it. Follicles, produce this sort of protein called the thyroglobulin. Okay, and the thyroid, the real hormones of the thyroid are T3 and T4. Triiodothyronine, which gets 3 iodine molecules, and tetraiodothyronine. It's got 4. This tetraiodothyronine, sometimes it's called thyroxine. Okay, and this is kind of like the inactive part. So the body produces mostly 90%. I mean, the thalamus does. I mean, the thyroid gland. Okay, it will produce mostly these. Okay, and then I'll show you a picture later on. I'll talk about this later on when I talk about the function of this. And then it's converted to T3, which is the active one. Okay, so the thyroid only produces about 10%, of the T3. Triiodothyronine. Because these are lipid soluble, they are contained in these follicles, which are kind of sort of big globular shaped parts of the thyroid. In it, it will contain this protein called thyroglobulin, right? And it will associate with these guys. Why is that? I just told you the qualities of these two guys. What are these two guys that I said? They are lipid soluble. Okay? So if they're lipid soluble, what must happen to them? So they have to be attached to something. If they are lipid and then in an aqueous environment, what happens? Yeah, they're hydrophobic. So you have to do what to them to make them hydrophilic? You have to put in a protein. So that's what happens with the thyroglobulin. That's the function it serves. Okay? So the thyroglobulin surrounds all these T3 and T4 to make them soluble, because everything is in an aqueous environment. It's all water. Okay? So you're not going to have a lipid that's going to be happy unless if it's attached to something that's hydrophilic. So that's why you form these thyroglobulins to attach to these guys. Okay? And when it's traveling in blood, I'll show you a little cartoon, it is attached to another protein as well. It's bound to a protein, a transport protein that will transport it in blood. Okay? So I want you to see the significance, the reason for that. Okay? So there are certain cells called, we talked about this last time, when we did the bones, remember last time? And we said the thyroid gland produces which hormone? Calcium? Tonin. But the counterpart of it was PTH1 in the exam. And we'll talk about this after this. Okay, so the parafollicular cells will be sprinkled between the I'll show you a nice picture. And then it's a follicular cell, and then those follicular cells are the ones that produce calcitonin. Okay. Okay. But for the most part, the real hormones of the thyroid are called T4 and T3. Okay, tetra triiodide. Although this one, calcitonin, is of course a hormone of the thyroid, but it comes from the parafollicular cells inside of it. Okay, so these are the the main hormones produced, if I might say. Okay, but we know what calcitonin does, right? What does calcitonin do from the bone section that we did? What is calcitonin? What does it do? It causes what? Is it released when we have high calcium levels in the blood or low calcium levels in the blood? Okay, I'll ask that one. How about that? Is it high calcium levels or low calcium levels when calcitonin is released? Anybody remember? When we did talk about it when we did the skeletal system. Remember? A little bit? Yeah, when it's high calcium levels, because it will cause deposition of calcium into bone. That's the function of calcitonin. Okay? It will cause the deposition of calcium into bone, and it will stimulate osteocytes. Right? Osteocytes are those mature cells that build bone. Okay? What are the cells that break down bone? Osteoclasts. So when we talk about PTH, it will be stimulating osteoclasts, because osteoclasts break down bone to furnish calcium into blood. Right? Okay, so the things we do are related, guys. So you can't say, oh, we're done with it, we forget. No. You continue with it because it will come up. So calcitonin will be a freebie if I ask about it again, right? Because you get the chemicals. And so anyway, we already saw this, right? Remember I was talking about the thyroid gland. It's got those lateral lobes, and then the pyramidal lobe, and then the isthmus that joins them together. Sometimes I ask about a few characteristics of these things, and we talk about that, right? Okay, so these are you see these big cup-like, structures, these globular structures surrounded by the cells. Those are the follicles. In them will be the thyroglobulin protein, together with the T3 and T4 that are lipid-soluble hormones. Okay, so they are surrounded by that thyroglobulin protein, and these are the parafollicular cells that will release calcitonin. Okay, and calcitonin's function is to cause deposition of calcium into blood. Okay, do you see how it does that? It doesn't touch at the back there. Somebody wants to suggest a reason why that might be a good idea for it not to touch. For it not to completely surround the trachea, for instance. Think about it. If it's just hypertrophy, what will happen? It will crimp the trachea. You can't get it. Okay. There's one point though where we were not quite so lucky, men, that is, where the prostate gland completely surrounds the urethra. So us guys, when you get older and our prostate is hypertrophy, it will start to creep on the urethra. So you can't go pee. You have to go many times, and when you go, you can't be empty because it's creeping on it like this. It happens to all men. If you are lucky to live long enough, that prostate will hypertrophy. Okay? So there's the advantage of not having it completely surrounding pipes like that. That you have to, you see what I'm saying? Okay, because this thyroid, okay, because it releases, it forms triiodothyronine, and I said it's got 3 iodine molecules. It forms tetraiodothyronine, it's got 4 iodine molecules. There's a condition called goiter. Okay, goiter is a condition where there's less iodine prevalent in some African countries. Okay, and then, so when there's a shortage of iodine, the thyroid will start to expand. And you see the guys with the neck going down here. So you can imagine in the goiter condition, if that thyroid went completely around the trachea, you'd have big problems. You'd be suffocating yourself, or it's just like hanging yourself while you're just standing there. You see what I'm saying? Because it will start to crimp on the thing. So there's a big significance why it doesn't touch back there. You see what I'm saying? I might ask some of those things in the exam, you know what I'm saying? You tell me why. Because it makes a lot of sense. And things that make sense are hard to forget. right? You agree? Or maybe not. Some of you are like, no, it's hard to remember. But really, things that make sense are easier to remember because they make sense. Okay, so we talk about thyroid hormones, and I talked about how T3 and T4 are the main hormones of the thyroid. Okay, and they contain 3 and 4 iodine molecules respectively, and I talked about it. T3 is the active version, and you only produce about 10% of it. Okay, because you can easily knock off 1 iodine from the tetraiodothyronine to form the active version. Okay, it's an advantage, right? You don't want to have a whole bunch of active hormone in your system, isn't it? So you produce more of the inactive one, and you can always turn it to the active one when you need it, right? So that's why you have about 90% of it is tetraiodothyronine, which is also called thyroxine. Okay, and in the morning you're like, oh, can we abbreviate to T3, T4? I was like, yeah, you could, as long as you spell it out the first time. Or you can call thyroxine T4, you can call it thyroxine. But T3, I want you to say triiodothyronine T3. Then you can say T3 all you want. Ad libitum, you don't have to limit this. Okay? Because I want you to know how you know how to use it. Okay? Okay, good. Anyway, so that's that. So those are the major hormones of the thyroid produced by the follicular cells. Okay? And then the follicles. And then the parafollicular cells produce testosterone. So now we talk about the effects of the thyroid. Okay? The thyroid hormones, T3, T4, they upregulate your metabolism, mobilize nutrients, things like that, increase body temperature and stuff like that. So you find that people who have a hyperactive thyroid are always, jacked up like that because it's just too much energy. And people who, and their metabolism is very high, okay? People who have a hypoactive one, will have the opposite of that, okay? And, and they can't mobilize the glucose, and they'll gain weight because they are not mobilizing the glucose and so forth. They store a lot of fat. Okay. So sometimes I ask about the effects of these hormones in the exam. Okay. I say what are the effects of T3 and T4. So you need to know about that. Okay. So increased body temperature. Okay. When you increase your body temperature a little notch, what happens to the rates of reactions? Yeah, speed it up. So the thyroid hormones really jack up your metabolism. You know what I'm saying? Everything gets speeded up. You got your high metabolism and you are lean. Okay, you mobilize fat. Everything is gonna tend to glucose because it's the energy source of the body. Okay, your fat, your proteins, and all. So and it affects many tissues, of course. Okay, so what happens? You got all these nutrients in your system. You need to maintain blood pressure, right? Because if you don't have enough blood pressure, you're not going to be able to distribute all these nutrients throughout the body, right? So you need to maintain your blood pressure, okay? If it's too low, you won't have the nutrients go to where they need to go all the time. So, of course, it will regulate tissue growth if it mobilizes nutrients and it makes sure there's enough pressure to transport the nutrients around. So it's going to, affect the growth of those tissues, development, okay? So it will, cause the development of the skeletal, the nervous system, all those when they are growing. So it's kind of very important in a young person to have a properly functioning thyroid because they really need mobilization of all these nutrients and they're building new material as they get bigger. Okay? You see what I'm saying? So in kids, because one, it will cause maturation and reproductive capabilities are controlled by that. If you're hypoactive thyroid and you are young, you might become impotent, for instance, because it will not cause the maturation of your reproductive system. So that does a lot of things in reproductive capabilities. So I will ask about the effects of T3, T4. Okay? All right. So here's another cartoon.
Thyroxine is a water-insoluble hormone that is brought to the target cell via a protein carrier. Because it is lipophilic, thyroxine can easily pass through the cell membrane. Thyroxine contains 4 iodines and is often abbreviated T4, tetraiodothyronine. The thyroid gland also secretes smaller amounts of a similar molecule that has only 3 iodines, called triiodothyronine, T3. Both hormones enter target cells, but all the T4 that enters is converted into T3. Thus, only the T3 form of the hormone enters the nucleus and binds to nuclear receptor proteins. The hormone receptor protein complex, in turn, binds to the appropriate hormone response elements on DNA. The binding of the hormone receptor complex has a direct effect on the level of transcription at the site where it binds. The messenger RNA, mRNA, produced then codes for specific proteins.
Okay. So in the exam, I might say, can you give me the mechanism of action of thyroxine or triiodothyronine? Then you're going to be talking about a nuclear receptor, right? Or if I ask specifically about the cytoplasmic receptor one, okay? So be watchful of that, okay? If I name a specific hormone like T3 or T4, or I talk about triiodothyronine or the thyroid hormones, I could even just say thyroid hormones, you know to give me a nuclear receptor, okay? Because that one attaches to a receptor in the nucleus, okay? So I just want to give you more stuff. Okay, so calcitonin. Remember, calcitonin is produced by the parafollicular cells that surrounds the follicles in the thyroid, and we talked about calcitonin already. We know that it will be secreted when blood calcium levels are high, okay, so that it will cause the deposition of calcium into bone, okay, so it will stimulate osteocytes. Remember, the osteocytes are the mature bone cells that maintain the matrix. Okay, so it will stimulate osteocytes, and then because of that, it will you have to inhibit osteoclasts, right? Because you can't have those things together working together because it will be like opposite. So you have to cut off the osteoclasts so that you can deposit the calcium into bone. So you take in some milk or something, and you've got a bunch of calcium in your blood, whatever you take, and there's calcium in it. And then you release calcitonin. Just like when you eat a meal and you get blood glucose in there, you release insulin, right? So that the cells can take up the glucose. Okay, so you gotta do that. So in the exam, if I was to ask again about this, it's a freebie because we saw it breaking the bones. Okay, you talk about the effects of calcitonin. It's easy, right? Should be, because now you're seeing it for the 100th time. 100th time, right? So it will stimulate calcium uptake by the bone, okay, which is deposition of calcium into the bone, right? So now we talk about that, those 4 little glands on the back, you know, when you go to the back it doesn't touch, there'll be 4 little dots there called the parathyroid gland, okay? So those 4 little things are called the parathyroid gland. And the parathyroid gland produces which hormone? We all know about it. Parathyroid. Don't say PTH, say parathyroid hormone. Okay? Don't get used to the abbreviation. Parathyroid hormone. And it's named after the gland that produces it, so that's only an easy one. And we know the 3 effects of parathyroid hormone, right? Because that one was in the exam. I remember that one. Remember? So if I ask about this again, that should be like a freebie. You should be like, oh my God, is it crazy? And you get it correct, okay? Because you've seen it many times now. So those are the tiny little 4 of them on the back of the thyroid. So they're like that. And they produce PTH, parathyroid. In fact, PTH is very important in calcium metabolism and calcium levels in the blood, okay? Because it does a lot of things. It does 3 things. Okay, so it's called parathyroid. It's a peptide again, hormone, and it's really important in regulation of calcium. You know, so it's very important. PTH is more essential than calcium in terms of, calcitonin, in terms of regulating calcium levels. All right. So PTH will increase osteoclast activity so that it will break down calcium from bone. Okay, if you're not taking enough exogenous calcium, your body will do that, okay? It will break down the calcium from the bone, okay? But it won't do a lot of that. Why? Because your bones will end up getting weak, If each time you need calcium, you harvest it from the bones. Each time you need calcium, you go to the bones again. Okay, they become weak. So what else does PTH do? It will, yes, it will activate formation of active vitamin D by the kidneys, which does what? Of calcium in the small intestine. What else does it do? What else does PTH do? Final thing. In the kidneys again, what else does it do? The kidney gets rid of ions and stuff. So it will increase reabsorption of calcium from urine so that you don't just void it through your urine. So you have more retention of calcium in the kidneys, you have more absorption of calcium in the small intestine, and then a little bit from the bones. Okay? So that you're not busy breaking down your bone and making your bone weak. Okay? So that's what it do. Because I might want to ask that question again, just for, and ask about the effects of PTH, because I saw in the modules you guys had problems with that again. I saw you had problems with calcitonin, you had problems with PTH in the modules when it was asking about that. Okay, so so now you should know it. Okay, you should never forget this. Okay, PTH will do that. Those three things: break down calcium from bone, break down, cause formation of active vitamin D from the kidneys. That will cause absorption of calcium from the small intestine, and then it will also cause the kidneys to retain or reabsorb more calcium, so that you increase the calcium levels. Okay, so those three effects are very important. Okay, so whenever you have low blood calcium levels, you release PTH, parathyroid hormone. Whenever you have high blood calcium levels, you release calcitonin. Okay, calcitonin from the thyroid gland. They're all kind of sort of in the same area, because parathyroid is behind, right, on the thyroid gland. Okay, so that's that. Right. So what do we do now? Adrenal glands. Adrenal means next to, renal, kidneys. Okay, and it's right on top of the kidneys. You see that? Right on top of the kidneys, right there. And then in the actual cadaver, you can see that. Okay, and you can even see the abdominal aorta and so forth, and the arteries. Isn't that right? Nice. And then you see this iliac arteries. Okay. Anyway, so on top of the kidneys, and this has got two layers: the cortex, which itself has 3 layers that produce different hormones, and then the adrenal medulla, which is the inner layer, which produces epinephrine and norepinephrine. Okay. So this one, the adrenal gland, actually produces kind of 4 types of hormones. It's almost like a 4 glands in one, if you will. You know what I'm saying? Because they all produce different things. So the adrenal glands, okay, they're paired, kind of pyramidal in shape, right on top of the kidneys. That's why they're called adrenal, next to the kidneys. Right? Okay, and they sit right on top of the kidneys. Okay, like I was saying, you got the adrenal medulla, which is the inner layer that produces epinephrine and norepinephrine, otherwise known as adrenaline from the adrenal gland and noradrenaline, right? And these are involved in the fight-flight situations, right? And we'll start to talk about the effects of epinephrine. I think it was in your module too. And you guys had forms with listing the effects of epinephrine, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So this is, of course, the sympathetic system, which usually increases. Okay, and then of course the adrenal cortex. It's got 3 layers. So this is what I was talking about. It's almost like 4 glands in one. The medulla, and then you got the zona glomerulosa, which produces what are called mineralocorticoids. Okay, mineralocorticoids. Can you guess what they're involved in? What are mineralocorticoids involved in? Those hormones. The name says it. What do you think? Minerals? Yeah. What are minerals? Calcium, sodium. Okay, like aldosterone, sodium levels in the blood. Okay, and then the zona fasciculata is glucocorticoids. Glucocorticoids. And guess what these ones do? Yeah, they do with glucose metabolism and mobilization of glucose. Okay? And so one thing you might want to resist, if I'm kind of telling you right now, is resist the temptation to say the zona glomerulosa is involved with glucocorticoids, because it's not. Okay? I didn't name them, so I would have done that if I was naming them, to make it nice and easy, right? But it's not. The glomerulosa doesn't do the glucocorticoids. It actually does the mineralocorticoids. And the zona reticularis does the gonadocorticoids. All right? Gonado means the gonads, reproductive system. So this produces androgens, which can be turned into testosterone and estrogen. Okay? So that's why they're called gonadocorticoids. Okay? So you can see we got epinephrine and norepinephrine up here. We got mineralocorticoids that affect minerals like sodium, and then we got glucocorticoids that mobilize, glucose, like cortisol is an example of a glucocorticoid. Cortisol, okay? It will turn all the other compounds, organic compounds, into glucose, like fat into glucose, proteins into glucose, everything. Okay? It's usually released when the body is in a stressful condition, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then the zona reticularis, okay? And then, of course, like I was saying, this is like 4 glands in one, okay? Because it produces 4 groups of hormones that do very different things, okay? That's the adrenal glands, okay? So these are them: the medulla, epinephrine, norepinephrine, glomerulosa, fasciculata, reticularis, okay? And then it produces those hormones we talked about. Okay, so here they are. So mostly epinephrine is about 8% of it, so that's the adrenaline. Okay, and then 20% of it is norepinephrine. They are related compounds. Okay, but epinephrine is the one that really does all those fight-flight situations. So that's why when you have an EpiPen, you jab yourself and then these are the activities. So what is it going to do? It's going to increase heart rate. This was your modular question that was in your level. Okay, so not only do you just increase glucose levels, okay, you mobilize, you have higher heart rate, so you can pump more blood. It will distribute more glucose to the muscles because they'll be needing more blood. Okay, not only that, it will shut off blood to other organs where it's not needed, like your skin. Okay, if you're running away from a lion, you'd rather your blood is in your legs than going to your digestive or your skin. Okay, so usually that's when you become ashamed, when you're frightened, because all the blood leaves. Okay, you lose color. When you're frightened, have you noticed that? When you're frightened, you lose color because all your blood is going to go somewhere else where it needs to really, do something about it. Okay, so whenever you think about these things, if I ask about all these effects of these hormones, be practical about it. Think about it yourself. When you're running away from a lion, what are you going to need to do? When you're jogging on the treadmill, you're going to be needing a whole bunch of your blood, pressure is going to go up, your heart rate is going to go up, all those things. Your temperature is going to go up, all those things, right? So just think about that, okay? And think about the areas where you might want to switch off blood, and think about the areas where you might want a lot of blood, okay? So that's what it will do. It will do vasoconstriction to skin and viscera, like the digestive system. Just ate a Big Mac, and there's a bear over there. You're going to be stopping all the digestive activities, okay, and send it to the legs so you can get the hell out of there. That's what happens, okay? And then so you're going to cause vasodilation to the blood vessels that go to the legs, or to whatever muscle that you need to do your job, to get out of there. Okay, so sometimes I do ask about the effects of epinephrine, so that's like a nice 5-point question. Okay, so you think about that, all right? Makes sense, and just practical about it, and you can easily remember these points. If you think of it logically, you don't have to like memorize them or cram them down. You know what I'm saying? Because these things kind of make sense. So of course, the sympathetic system is involved, because the sympathetic is one that stimulates and does all those things. All right. So it's going to be dealing with emotions, injury, stress. Okay, when you're stressed. Okay. So know the effects of that, of the epinephrine from the, I might just say, what are the effects of the adrenal medulla hormones? Right? That would be epinephrine, right? So you talk about that, fight, flight. I might just do that if I make it fancy. but it's not really fancy because you know that the adrenal medulla produces the epinephrine and no epinephrine. Okay, so when you're doing exercise, you release a bunch of epinephrine for that. Your blood pressure goes up, your blood rate goes up, your heart rate goes up. Sorry, and then so when you've got low blood glucose levels, you release that so that it will mobilize the glucose, right? In stressful situations. So the adrenal cortex, this is one that forms the mineralocorticoids, the glucocorticoids, and the gonadocorticoids, right? And they're called corticosteroids because of that, because of the cortex where they are produced, the top layer. So we talked about it, glomerulosa, mineralocorticoids, okay? Fasciculata, glucocorticoids. So resist that temptation. So cortisol actually is a stress hormone because cortisol is released whenever the body is stressed with anything. The body's response is to produce nutrients like glucose because we need glucose. Okay, so it will release cortisol. What happens though when you are in constant stress? You release a bunch of cortisol. What happens with cortisol is that when you're stressed, it will not only jack up the glucose, it will depress the immune system. Okay, because it's thinking, okay, it's better to deal with this problem that you're having, whatever it is. So it's a natural body response to kind of shut down other systems so you can focus on the one thing. Okay. But the problem of constant stress is that constantly down-regulating your immune system gets you what? Sick. So that's why when you're stressed, what usually happens, if you're really stressed, you get a cold, right? That's because of the down-regulation of the immune system by cortisol. Okay. In fact, they use cortisol sometimes to measure if you're stressed, constantly stressed, you will find high cortisol levels in your blood. Because when you're constantly stressed, the body is trying to do something to address the problem, and it will release cortisol, because cortisol does what? Finishes nutrients and so forth to try and do. So that's the only way the body knows how to respond. But the problem comes with that. Cortisol depresses the immune system because it's trying to focus on that problem, and then you usually get sick. If you're stressed, you usually come down with a cold. Have you noticed that? Yeah. Yeah. That's what happens. That's a common thing actually. You never think about it, but that's why. Okay? Because of cortisol. So it's sometimes also called a stress hormone. Okay? And then there's reticularis, like I was talking about, forms gonadocorticoids, which form androgens. Testosterone and estrogen are both based on androgens. You first form androgens that then get converted to testosterone and estrogen. Even estrogen, the female hormone, is based on androgens. Okay? So the adrenal cortex can make some androgens if you need, some extra. Okay? If your gonads are not producing enough testosterone, you may produce some from your adrenal cortex. Okay, so now we move on to the pancreas. So the pancreas, like we talked about, well, we didn't talk about it that much. It's got an exocrine. I'm thinking of my digestive system in a picture. It's got an exocrine section that produces enzymes that are involved in digestion because it connects to the small intestine, right? But it also has an endocrine function. That's why we talk about the pancreas as one of the endocrine glands, although it's not strictly endocrine. Okay, so the endocrine part of it will produce what hormones? From the islets of Langerhans, or pancreatic islets, it will produce glucagon from the alpha cells, and what's the other hormone? Insulin from the beta cells. Okay, from the beta cells. Okay, so we're not interested today in the acinar function because it's an acinar gland, just looks like this. Remember, it looks like a sac-like. Remember when we did glands, it was in there. So acinar looks like a sac like that. So that's the shape of those, and those produce the enzyme part. And it's exocrine because it's got a duct. Okay, but then the pancreatic islets, or the islets of Langerhans, will produce the endocrine, which is released into the blood because it doesn't have ducts, right? And then, like I said, we have the glucagon from the alpha cells. Produces what does glucagon do? What's the function of glucagon? I think it was in the exam last week. What does the function of glucagon? What are you thinking here? GLU? You're forming glucose from glycogen. Okay. Usually these names tell you what they're doing. Okay, so you just have to think about it. Glucagon sounds like glucose. They must have something to do with glucose. Okay, so these names really help you out a little bit. So when you're in the exam situation, focus on those things, because those names kind of give you a cheat sheet kind of thing. They tell you where you're going. Okay, because when you get stuck in an exam, you shut down. I think it's because when you get stressed, and then you shut down and you stop to think. But the answer might sometimes be right in front of you. Okay, because these words are like that. And then, of course, the beta cells will produce insulin, which will cause the uptake of glucose by cells. Okay, so that's why if you are diabetic, you're not releasing insulin. What happens is that the glucose will stay in blood. The cells don't take it up. Then you become faint and you do all those things. Okay. Right. So again, look at these pictures of the actual cadavers. Okay, it's got all these things in there. Okay, the head of it, the body, the tail, the pancreas kind of sort of crosses like that, just under the stomach. And then the pineal body. This one kind of is not a big function, but it produces melatonin, and melatonin is involved in sleep-wake cycles. Okay, melatonin is may regulate sleep-wake cycles, but they're not too sure about some of the other functions of melatonin. Okay, and this is one of the glands that is in the brain. Okay, it sometimes can inhibit reproductive maturation. Okay, but I think the big function of this is regulation of the sleep-wake cycles. Okay, some of the sleeping aids, they have the melatonin in it. Okay, if some of you use sleeping pills and so forth, you might see melatonin because of that regulation of the sleep-wake cycle. Okay, so know that the pineal gland produces melatonin, and then melatonin is big involvement in the sleep-wake cycles, controls the sleep-wake cycle. So, and the pineal gland is right in there, right on top. You see, this is where your pituitary is. This is the hypothalamus. This is the thalamus, and there's your pineal gland. So they're all kind of in that location. Kind of called the diencephalon. Okay, we'll do that towards the end of this. For me, step 4. The parts of the brain. Now the thymus, again, it's also in the chest area here, and it's involved in immunity. The thymus produces thymopoietin, those are the hormones, and thymosins. And those two hormones cause the maturation of T cells. Okay? T cells from thymus. T-thymus, T cells. Okay? They mature in the thymus. So thymopoietin and thymosins cause maturation of T cells. Okay? So it's involved in immunity that way. Okay? So these are the T cells. T from thymus. Okay? Alright? So usually in babies, because they're naive, they haven't been exposed to many bugs, the thymus is huge, okay, in relation to the adults. As you get older and you become exposed and you form all these memory cells, well, the thing will start to atrophy. The thymus will start to atrophy and it gets replaced by fat. By the time you're about 60, it's really small and it's mostly fat. Okay, so that's one of the things about it. Okay, the thymus, it's bigger in kids. You see, you may have seen it when you might see it when we open the digestive system next time in A and B2. It's right on top of the heart, right on top of the superior vena cava and so forth. Okay, and it's right in the chest area again. Okay, the thymus is. You can see. That's why I show you the picture. That's probably a fetus that's been dissected over there. You see how big it is in relation to an adult. It's much bigger in the kids because they are still naive to all this, and their immune system is still growing. Again, this is just a summary of all the hormones that we talked about. It will show the glands from which they are produced, right? Okay, so this is just a summary. Okay, but it also goes on to talk about other things, like the ovaries, of course, produce androgens, and the placenta produces like human chorionic gonadotropin, HCG, when you're pregnant females, all right? And then a whole host of other organs that I'll talk about, like the small intestine produces, cholecystokinin, it's secreted for digestive activities, okay? All right, so this is why we talk about these guys, okay? These are some other organs from other systems that happen to have cells within them that will produce a hormone. Okay, so the gastrointestinal tract, like the stomach, produces gastrin. Okay, so this is the stomach. Okay, secreting from the small intestine, particularly the duodenum, does that. and cholecystokinin as well produced by the duodenum, and these are involved in digestive function. All right, and then the kidney produces erythropoietin, which is involved in red blood cell production. Okay, erythropoietin. Why? Because the kidney filters blood. It knows exactly what is in blood. Okay, erythropoietin stimulates red blood cell production. And then, of course, the placenta in pregnancy, not only does it pass nutrients to and from, the nutrients to the kid, to the fetus, and then waste out, but it will produce hormones. Okay, like HCG, and then some of the progesterone, most of the progesterone is taken over by the placenta, is produced by the placenta, and the estrogens that maintain the uterus. Okay, as it nurtures the developing fetus in it. Okay, so that's that. So just to show you that there are other, organs in the body that also produce hormones. Then at the end there are hormone-like substances. Okay, and I think you had kind of problems with this bit in terms of the effects of these and how different they are from actual hormones. These hormone-like substances are not produced by a specific gland, okay, and they act locally only. They don't go into blood like what hormones do, and they travel in blood so that the effect is systemic. It's system-wide. Okay, with these guys, it's local. And there's two types. The autocrine will affect the ones, local cells that look like them, similar cells. Auto means same. Okay, and then paracrine will affect local cells that are different. See what I'm saying? Like growth factors, every cell grows. So the growth factors are a perfect example of paracrine substances because they affect different kinds of cells. Okay? And then there are some that will only affect similar cells. Okay? But growth factors, clotting factors, histamine and all those things, they all have, they act on different cells. And it makes sense too, because all the cells grow, so it's not fair that only a certain cell type is affected. So paracrine affects all the different cells, but autocrine will affect similar cells only. Locally though, okay? Only in the same location. Because the differences between paracrine substances and autocrine substances and the actual hormones, so the difference between hormone-like substances with actual hormones is that they're not produced by a specific gland. It's only kind of sort of diffuse cells that are sprinkled throughout the body. Okay, they're not secreted by an actual endocrine gland, and they have just local effects. Whereas hormones, they are released into blood, and they have systemic effects. They have system-wide because it is distributed throughout the body in the blood, but not paracrine. Because sometimes I might ask you in the exam, can you tell me the difference between hormone-like substances and hormones? Okay, and then also some of their functions are not quite understood. There are little factors that are kind of sort of involved, but their functions are not definite because of that. Okay, but they do serve some particular role. So these are the major differences between those, hormone-like substances and actual hormones. And as usual, we always use this system comparison so that you know how the systems affect each other. And that's it. Thank you guys, I appreciate it. We shall see you in the lab today, guys. Do not go to the math building. Don't go to the library, okay? We are meeting in the regular 2387, and I'll see you in a little bit.